There's a midrash which explains that when Esav and Yaakov were in the womb of the mother Rivka, the Torah tells us Rivka felt tremendous agitation. She felt rumbling within her innards, and she didn't know what it was. To the point, it was a level of pain which was intolerable. So she went to seek out a reading. And she went to Shem, the son of Noach, who was a prophet. And he explained to her that what's going on, you have two nations in your womb. Meaning these two children, these unborn fetuses at this point, one represents the most extreme level of evil, and the other one represents what's considered pure on the absolute level in terms of holiness. And what they're fighting over the worlds of this existence, who will have the upper hand. But as they emerge from your womb, they will emerge in the direction, each one will go in his direction. The one who's meant to be evil will be evil, and the one that's meant to be pure will have that level of purity to be able to achieve it. Of course, everybody has choice, but the overwhelming level of inclination, each of them is either positive or negative. And of course, as we read, the first child to come out, they called Esau. He was red, he was hairy, he was covered like a fully developed human being. He had a coat of hair on his body. Yaakov was the second one to come out, and he was holding on to the heel of his brother, which symbolism was that ultimately he will topple him. Even though at this point, we have to contend with Esau, as we read in the Torah where Yaakov had fled after he had taken the birthright, which was rightfully his. Esau vowed to kill him. And even at the very end, when he was returning, he came against him to destroy him. But Yaakov, due to a number of things which he had done, he prayed, he sent a gift, a very valuable gift, flocks and herds and precious stones. And thirdly, he was ready to go to war with him. And he realized it would be a fight to the death, or he would engage with one another. Ultimately, because Yaakov had humbled himself before Esau, as it says, he bowed 7 times. Somehow Esau was touched by this, and ultimately they embraced. And Esau cried. He was able to soften Esau's heart at that moment through showing a level of humility to Esau. But what was the divide? The divide before they came out was the world to come is Yaakov's, and the physical world is Esau's. The Edomites, their physical prowess, their control, that they dominate the world, as it's Rome. Rome ruled the world for 500 years. They ruled the world supreme. They destroyed the Second Temple. Yaakov, he has his domain is the world to come, the world of spirituality, as it says. He was the man who dwelt in the tent of Torah. And when Esau saw this enormously great wealth, which Yaakov had sent him, he asked him a question. He said, It seems to be you violated our agreement. The world to come is yours. The physical world is mine. And I see you embezzled. You crossed the line and you took the physical world. You took the material of the physical world, which is not your domain. That was the claim Esav had said to Yaakov. So Yaakov says, you don't understand. The physical world is yours, where the value of the physicality is purely for the physical. But the physical, where its value and its purpose is to facilitate the spiritual, that's not called physical. That's not taking part in the physical world. That is available because since we're human beings, and as it says in Pirkei Avos, in Men Kemach Ein Torah, if there's no bread, there's no Torah. We have to facilitate our existence through the material. So the wealth God endowed me with is not to indulge in the physical. It's only to magnify and advance and secure the spiritual. Therefore, what I took is rightfully mine. So in reality, if a non-Jew does behavior is unconscionable, even if he violates the 7 Noahide laws, he should not be subject to punishment. But the Jew who crosses lines, which he shouldn't, or he indulges in the material, which he has no right to, because the material is not ours, that's Esav's domain. That's the domain of the Edomites. Our domain is spiritual, and we're meant to utilize the material only to facilitate the spiritual. That's called embezzlement. It's an embezzlement. It's interesting. We had mentioned, the Gemara tells us that a person eats or drinks, if it is not predicated on an acknowledgement that God is the master, the omnipotent one, the king of the universe, when he partakes in that food and drink, he's actually benefiting from something that has a consecrated status. You have no right to it. It's only once you acknowledge the master, then God releases it into your domain. But why? Because the Jew himself, what is the value of partaking of the material? Only to advance that the facility is spiritual. So if you eat or drink, and it's an opportunity to make that acknowledgement that the world is God's, God says that's exactly what it's all about. The world was created exactly for that purpose. That when you are confronted with a challenge, you eat to indulge. And indulge means without conscience, meaning totally uninhibited. You have a right to put your head in that feed bag whenever you choose, to go to the trough whenever you choose. Or no, I go, even when I go, and even if what's driving me is my physical desire, but I know, unless I acknowledge who the master is prior to that moment, I'm not permitted to partake of it. Even if you're driven by the physical, it has to be somehow touched within the context of spiritual, and therefore it has to be predicated on the blessing. And these are after blessing. To acknowledge in what context were you a beneficiary, whether it's a grain product, whether it's in any product, there's an after blessing. To acknowledge that you were a beneficiary of something that God provided with you. So everything is within the context of it's God's world. And that's how the Jew has to live. The ultimate level is, as King Solomon says in Mishlei, Tzaddik ochel l'sov nafsho. The tzaddik, when he eats, he only eats to save his soul. Nothing more. He has no interest in more. Why do I eat? Why do I live? To do the will of God. So anything which is more than that, that's an infringement on God's time. I'll give you an example. Person has a half an hour lunch break. Then you have to get back to work. And the person is out for an hour. That's called you're stealing the boss's time. You only permitted to eat for an hour, for half an hour. That's the break. Take more than half an hour, you have an expense account, and you have a limitation on what you could spend. And it's the company's credit card. And you put things on that credit card which you have no right to. That's called embezzlement. That's called stealing. The Jew himself, at the ultimate level, you only partake of the material for the sake of the spiritual. Because that's exactly what the world is all about. L'chvodi barosiv. The Navi, the prophet says, I created this world for my glory. Despite you being a physical animal, because we're a composite of the physical and the spiritual, you have to spiritualize and you have to tame and condition the animal and spiritualize it, that it should be conditioned to naturally gravitate towards the spiritual. That's the ultimate objective of life. That the reality is nobody's born a tzaddik. Every one of us has our setbacks. There's no perfect tzaddik. That's reality. And that's how the midas harachman, the attribute of mercy, that's the interplay. Without that, we couldn't survive. But there's mercy, because God understands exactly what we have to contend with. We're all victims of the tree of knowledge, of Adam's failing. So it always rears its head, and it's not a simple matter. But factually, the only one who has a right or deserves to have his wings clipped is only the Jew. The non-Jew, even when he crosses those lines, he shouldn't have his wings clipped. Because the world is his world to have the world. That's not his domain spiritual. It's not to facilitate the spiritual. It's the world for the world, material for material. Therefore, Esav said to Yaakov, I don't understand what's going on here. You're supposed to be this devout, holy man. And you put your hand in the till. He says, no, I didn't put my hand in the till. And that's what Yaakov responded. When initially Esav did not want to take the gift, Esav says, I have so much. Yeshli Rov. Yaakov says, Yeshli Kol. I have it all. Meaning, whatever I have, it's because God provided it to facilitate my service of God. I have it all. If he will give me less, that's all necessary. But now that he's given more, that only indicates that the level of responsibility and objective of bringing about my perfection is to a greater degree. Because you need more material to facilitate a greater level of what? Of spiritual. Give you an example. Person is able to earn tremendous amounts of money. Now, what is the value of money? We do a lot of good things with money. Thank God today we live in a generation, there are tens and tens of thousands of children studying Torah. Literally. The Jewish projects and objectives and initiatives that have to be underwritten, whether it's feeding the poor, whether it's people paying their tuitions, whether it's providing clothing for people, health issues, Hatzalah, emergency ambulance corps, which is a level of selfless chesed, which is not to be believed. Takes tremendous amounts of money. So you have that money, but you have a choice. In which basket do you put your eggs? In the spiritual basket to facilitate the needs of today, which are unbelievable, which are unlimited, the financial needs of the Jewish people? Or do you put them into your own personal investments to further your and secure your own finances? That's where you put it. There was a king. He was from the Herodian dynasty, but he was he was a tzaddik. His name was Munvaz. Munvaz and he wasn't from the Davidic line. But he was a tzaddik, devout. And what happened? All the previous generations of that dynasty, they stored away a tremendous amount of wealth. Tremendous. And they stored away for the next generation. Each generation stored away for the next generations. And when he became king, you know what he did with all that wealth? He gave it away to charity, only to do mitzvahs. And the family was upset. Every generation stored it for the next generation. And all of a sudden, he becomes king. He gives it all away. So Munviz, that was his name, Munviz, he says, when they stored it away, they stored away for others. When I stored it away, I stored away for myself. Because whatever I gave away, that's mine. That's part of my eternity. What the others stored away, others may be beneficiaries. But even the beneficiaries, it's within the physical context. Others stored away on the terrestrial level. I stored away on the celestial level, on the spiritual level. That was Munviz's statement when people were taken aback. How did he give it all away? That's what he said. So for a Jew, what is the value of the material? Purely to facilitate the spiritual. We find that the Avos HaKadoshim, the holy patriarchs, every one of them had phenomenal wealth. Avraham Avinu had wealth when he was told to leave his birthplace, his family, his homeland. He will have great wealth, and he had great wealth. When he went to Egypt, came back, he was laden down with tremendous amount of wealth. Yitzchak was wealthy. Yaakov, we see just the gift he gave Esau, he was wealthy. What did he need such wealth? What did Yaakov need such wealth? After working 14 years for the hands of both wives, he said to his father-in-law, now I have to make my own fortune. Therefore, the next 6 years, Yaakov built an empire, a financial empire with his children, which is I have to do for my family. What does it need so much money, so much wealth? The answer is, unfortunately, what does the world respect? What does the world understand? You say, you open up a tractate and you try to share with them a spiritual concept. They don't even relate to it. But if a man like Paul Reichman or Moshe Reichman, Zechron Livrocha, the wealthiest Jew in the world, the man gives $131 million a year to charity. He owns Canary Wharf. And there's no door which is closed in his presence. This is power. And you know something? He's an observant Jew. He shuts his business down every Saturday. And if it's a holiday, he doesn't let his Gentile workers to work, and he pays them full salaries. And he treats them like princes, he treats his employees. It's unheard of. And they speak of him like he's a prince. You know what that's called? That's called Kiddush Hashem. So because he had this degree of wealth, and he utilized it, and he had a representation of something above reproach, his integrity, his manner of dealing with people was the greatest level of respect. Every moment of his involvement was what we call Kiddush Hashem. The Avos HaKadoshim, they lived in the pagan world. They were the slight spark of spirituality. They had to magnify that spark. They had to illuminate the world. When Yaakov came to Egypt, who was the viceroy? Egypt was the height of civilization. His son, Yosef. Yosef came to greet his father. He even hitched his own chariot. And the Midrash tells us that the greatest honor that ever was accorded to the human being was to Yaakov. Because when Yosef went to greet his father, who do you think followed? All the elders of Egypt. And if the elders of Egypt are going to greet Yaakov, the masses of Egypt, they all went to greet Yaakov. Who was Yaakov? He's 130 years old. He's a man who's in another world. He has a level of holiness which reflects Adam's holiness. What's going on over here? Doesn't make sense. Evidently, it makes a lot of sense. If Yosef is the financial genius of the world, he saved Egypt from the famine. He gathered all the wealth of the world for Egypt. And he understands the value of this man. That man probably has value. This is the ultimate level of esteeming, revering, and quantifying what the world is all about. That's Yaakov. Only Yosef, because in his position, was he able to bring about that level of Kiddush Hashem. So the value of the material, the value of the power that Yosef had, he invested every aspect of that purely to facilitate a situation that the Jews should be able to survive through this lengthy bondage and exile. That was Yosef. And Yosef, because he was known as Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef, the devout, righteous one. He was able to raise two sons, although they were Yaakov's grandchildren, but they assumed the status of tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, although the father was not Yaakov. So who was Yosef? He was the financial genius. He was able, in a moment, to develop a plan how to save Egypt and advance it to the heights of material and power. But who is he? He's the man with Pharaoh said, have you ever seen a person with the spirit of God within him? There's a pagan speaking. But that was Yosef. Yaakov was the same thing. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, each of them, having that degree of wealth and earning the respect of the world due to that power. Avram had defeated the four mightiest kings after they had taken Lot captive. And he was declared and pronounced by the world as the Prince of God. One man should defeat the four mightiest powers. It's unheard of. Evidently, he has something in his toolbox which most people don't. What is it? Some kind of secret weapon. But whatever it is, it's called Elokim. It's called godliness. He's the Prince of God. We read about the second paragraph of the Shema. Im Shema tishma mitzvosai. If you will heed my mitzvos. Which I command you to serve, to love God with all your souls, with all your heart and all your soul. You pray, as we said, cholavavchem, that's the service of the heart, that's tefillah. That when you stand before God, you recognize who He is and who you are. Chol nafshem, you give your life. So, who are we identifying? Who are we? We are God's subjects. We are God's subjects. We live and we breathe for God. If that's the case, you're on the company credit card. The company covers all your expenses. Now the rains will come in their time. And you're going to bring in your harvest. Your wine, your olives. The fields will give forth their pasture lands, meaning the grass which is needed to feed the animals. You will need it to be sated. You'll be lacking nothing. You will not be distracted. Why? Because you've already established yourself. Who are you? I'm here to live my life and actualize every aspect of my life to do your will. God says the rains will come in their times. You'll have bounty. You'll bring it in. You'll be lacking nothing. You will not be distracted. You'll be sated. However, whenever we reach that point, we have it all. Now we start having whisperings in our ears. if you're already giving God 100% of your life, and if you give him 95% of your life, and you put a little in your pocket, you think God will really mind? Or 1% in your pocket. Well, a company makes tremendous amount of profits. And a person, when he embezzles, it's less than 1,000% of 1%. What is he taking? But it's called stealing. You're embezzling. And once you start, and you take a little bit more, are they going to know the difference? Is it going to make a difference? And you go from bad to worse. That's what happens. When you reach that level, don't allow your hearts to be seduced. Now you're open for seduction because you have such a degree of success. A person earns a pittance. So any little bit you take off, you put the company in jeopardy if you embezzle. But if there's so much money and so much profit, the little bit I take off, I say siphon off means nothing. But you don't realize where that's going. You have to be extra vigilant and careful. Do not allow yourself to be seduced. Don't allow your heart to seduce you, to convince you. It's okay. It doesn't make a difference. It makes a big difference. Because it's a slippery slope. Once you allow that voice, those whisperings, to touch you, and you give it value, it goes from bad to worse. The Ben Ish Chai, whose yahrzeit was this past Friday, was the leading Torah sage in Iraq in the latter part of the 19th century, beginning 20th century in Baghdad. And he wrote many works. He was a very great Kabbalist, great Torah sage. And many of the Sephardic Jews, that tradition follows his tradition, that customs, as he set in place. And one of the works he wrote, it's a book of allegories. And allegories, each one is a message to learn from. What is one of them? He writes over there was a knight. And the knight is returning from battle. And before he enters into the capital city to be greeted by his peers and by the king and the ministers, and he has his steed that he rides, he has his knight's clothing with the armor. He feels he wants to stop off by the river and bathe in the river, so he should be clean. So what does he do? But before he comes to the river, he sees a little urchin, an urchin on the road, dressed in rags, literally like he was just taken out of squalor. And the urchin says to the knight, "Could I hitch a ride with you to the big city?" The knight was powerful. With one flick of a finger, he could kill this urchin. He says, "Of course, get on the back of the horse. We're going to go." So he says to the urchin, "But before we go, I have to stop off at the river to bathe. And then we'll continue." This urchin physically was as tall as the knight. Not as long as the knight, as tall as the knight. Okay. And as the knight is bathing, the urchin takes off his rags, his filthy rags, and he puts on the knight's clothing and his armor. He rides into the city. The knight comes out of river. He realizes he's naked. The only thing he has to clothe his nakedness are these filthy rags. He has no choice. He took his shoes, he took his boots, he took his clothing, took everything. And he rode into the capital city as if he's the knight. And the knight comes running after him into the city dressed in rags, screaming, he stole my clothing, he's not the night, I'm the night. And people look at this person, he looks like he's insane. If you're the night, what are you wearing those rags, those filthy rags? What happened? The answer is, once you let that filthy little character onto the rump of your horse, eventually he crawls onto the saddle. Not only does he crawl onto the saddle, he gets under your skin and he can strip your clothing without even realizing it. And he puts you off the horse. And he dresses you with filthy, putrid rags, which are permeated with impurity, which is sin. Before you turn around, it doesn't take long. You can't let him into the door. You let him through that front door, he works very quickly. He could hoodwink you, deceive you, fool you, convince you that dirt is gold and gold is whatever else is less than that. That's his allegory. Initially, you start at ground zero. You study the Torah, you review it. You come to understanding, you appreciate God. Rains come in that time. You bring in your harvest. You're able to feed your animals. You have wealth, you're able to eat to a sated point. No distractions. Now you got to be careful. Because now there's a question. Now that you start feeling your oats, the question is, who do I attribute this success to? To me, to myself, or it's all God-given? And it was only given for one purpose, to facilitate and advance your spirituality. You're only God's disperser, to facilitate, underwrite spiritual projects, charity, or other things, whatever it may be. Therefore, at this point, where you reach your pinnacle of success, now you have to be careful. Because now you're subject to seduction. You don't have two nickels to rub together. You see yourself as you're at the mercy of others. You're humbled. Who am I? What am I? The moment you feel that you are somebody, if I'm somebody, I have a right to say, I have a right to say. I have a position. Therefore, the Torah forewarns us. You have to be vigilant and careful to shut them out. Because if, God forbid, you allow yourself to be seduced, you could end up even with paganism. And then there you can activate God's wrath. And if God's wrath is activated, you'll be destroyed.